Welcome to the Skeptic's Guide to Investing with Steve Davenport and Clem Miller. Every 2 weeks, Steve and Clem bring you brief investment insights you may not find anywhere else. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Here are Steve and Clem.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Skeptic's Guide to Investment. This is Steve Davenport, and I'm here with Clem Miller, and we want to talk about the debt ceiling. It's certainly in the front of the news, and it's certainly something on a lot of people in Washington's plate. But how does it affect the average investor? What is the average person supposed to do with this? And should they be concerned, or should they just turn away and turn to another streaming channel and watch some more Love is Blind? I think that as Americans, we have a responsibility to be prudent and educated, and I think it's good to understand. And so we'd like to, in the next 20 minutes, kind of just go through some of the basics. And we think that by doing that, you'll be able to place the debt ceiling in the proper perspective to all the other things you have going on in your life. Clem, what do you think are the key points about the debt ceiling that the average investor needs to know?
Okay, so, definitionally first, we're talking about federal debt, right? That is T-bonds and T-bills. We're not talking about state debt. We're not talking about private debt. It's only federal government debt. So that's one thing. Second thing is we're talking about a ceiling, which is a ceiling on the overall stock of debt. We're not talking about a ceiling on debt service, right? We're talking about a ceiling on the stock of debt. That's second thing I would say. Third thing I would say is that given the fact that every year we typically have a deficit, I think the last time we didn't have a deficit was back in the Clinton years.
Yep.
Every year we have a deficit, that adds on to the debt so that the debt keeps growing year after year after year. And that necessitates increases in this debt ceiling. So that's the third thing I would say. The fourth thing I would say is that the U.S. is one of the very few countries, I think maybe there's only one other country, Denmark, I think, which has a debt ceiling. Because I think most countries realize that it's impractical to actually have a debt ceiling because you're going to actually have to raise it frequently, in this current environment. So I think that's, and of course the idea of a debt ceiling, emerged in a period when, there wasn't as much debt going on. It wasn't moving. It wasn't being taken on as fast as it is today. And so you have more frequent occasions when you reach the debt ceiling. And then that was the fourth thing. The fifth thing I would just say is that the idea of a ceiling on the absolute amount of debt makes less sense than the European style of debt ceiling, which is to say a certain ratio of GDP, GDP being a proxy for the capacity of the economy to manage a certain level of debt.
Yeah, let me just add 2 or 3 items. One item that I think needs to be considered is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security liabilities are not included in the debt ceiling. So when we look at the U.S. economy, I'm going to throw out numbers, Clem, and you can correct them if they're off by a lot. But I believe that right now, the U.S. economy has production capability or GDP of about 30 trillion. I think we're at about 40 trillion in our current debt and treasuries and other instruments. I think that the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid liabilities that are unmet would add another 25 to 30 trillion. So that would put us, if we were to include those, which I think they're real liabilities, and I think if anybody tried to cut them, there would be some real distress in the United States. So that really puts us, if we take 40 plus, let's say 20 for those things instead of 25 or 30, that puts us at 60, which was as a 200% ratio of the debt to GDP. But the biggest part I think that we're missing from this debt discussion is interest rates are much higher.
Yeah.
When interest rates were near zero, guess what? Servicing the debt was a 200 billion or 300 billion exercise. Now we're at 900, close to a trillion in interest. So that means every year we're going to have to service almost $1 trillion more than any defense budget, more than any other element in our economy that the government is involved in, will be debt service. Debt service is a cost. And if the interest rates don't come down, which I hate to say this, Clem, but tariffs lead to higher interest rates. Higher interest rates lead to the government debt service being even larger. So the amount of debt we have, it's one problem. It's not even truly the whole description of the problem. It's only a description of the stuff they keep track of, which is Treasuries and other securities, not including Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Irrational. Why don't we include them? They're real liabilities. They're really obligations that we intend to pay. Are they like a treasury? And so therefore I say, if we really ought to get serious, we need to get the whole problem out. And then we start talking about the whole problem and we start talking about lower rates, which would then say tariffs and these activities with our trading partners aren't lowering interest rates. Therefore, they can't be good for the overall economy because we can't keep growing and paying for things with our credit card when we should just say, let's cut the credit card up. Let's go to some type of a limited, I like your idea, making it European-like with the idea that it's based on the overall economy and a percentage above the economy. Okay, well, let's say it's a ceiling of 150% of GDP. And if we included Social Security, it's 200. I think you have to start somewhere, which is where I have the biggest frustration here because of all the things I've heard of with closing borders, opening borders, foundries, moving semiconductors, not moving semiconductors. Everything we talk about is irrespective of the biggest problem we face, which I believe is the deficits and the debt. Am I being too alarmist?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And let me ask you a question, Steve.
Oh, is it going to be hard?
No, it's going to be very easy.
All right.
No, it's actually semi-easy. Let's say we do have a default on this debt, that the debt ceiling isn't raised in time, that you have a default on part of the debt, or let's say that, there's a higher prospect of default because the debt ceiling has been reached. What do you think the rating agencies would do, the credit rating agencies, and how would the market respond to a downgrade of, there was a downgrade a few years ago during one of these episodes, but, if there are more downgrades, how do you think interest rates would respond to that?
We'll be right back.
We hope you're enjoying our episodes. If you are, then we'd greatly appreciate your liking, following, and sharing. Help us help others. Now let's get back to the discussion.
As you and I know, as CFAs, when the uncertainty rises, the interest rates rise. So therefore, I would say if there's a debt downgrade, then that's saying there's less certainty in the U.S. paying all of its debts. And I would say that would cause higher rates and it would make the problem worse. So therefore, I look at this as a problem that we need to face sooner, not later. And I also look at how we think about the debt and how we think about this. If we were having, if we had Miller Corp and Davenport Corp and we looked at our lives, what have we done in our life? We've gone to a point where we're trying to reduce debt so that we can more easily manage cash flow. and I look at us and say, hey, we want to invest in these starting industries. We want to help this industry in the US to help onshoring. All of these things are out there that we could be doing, but we can't because we are so hamstrung by debt. The one thing I've heard that has been the most frightening is that I've heard since we've had this incident where all of the Russian assets that were part of the SWIFT system were basically commandeered by whatever organizations that were part of the Ukraine alliance. And so those Russian assets that were in the system were basically taken over. And those assets are being used now to try to help the Ukraine rebuild. That decision to take a system that had rules and regulations and guidance and never included the ability to isolate one member was really a pretty big decision by the US Treasury. And what I would say the next decision that could come down the line that will be equally outrageous would be, well, if that country is doing things we don't like and we want to send a message, what if we said that the Chinese debt didn't deserve interest payments? Because their behavior is so anti-US that we feel they shouldn't be a part of the system. They need to be punished. And the way we punish them is to not pay interest. It would help our budget deficits. It would help our overall economy. But what would it mean to the world in terms of buyers of US Treasuries? If you are on the wrong side of the US, in terms of not getting along and not agreeing to tariffs and other things, we'll just stop paying the interest on your debt. The debt that you own of the US will suddenly become worthless. Not worthless, meaning it has no value, but just if you have no interest payment and you simply have principal, what do? Do you sell that to another country? Are they going to pay you for that debt having an interest payment? Or are they going to have to, you're going to have to take a discount to that so that the other person can get it? And when that other person gets it, they get an automatic increase because that country has a good relationship with the US and they can collect the interest. So there are things that are being discussed, and some of them seem outlandish, but we have a pretty outlandish situation with our debt. And I don't think we're even talking about the right picture. We're talking about a picture that doesn't include almost half of the obligations that we have as a country. So if we're not really thinking about the full obligations, we know that, Social Security increases and all of the things involved in Medicare, if we don't get a hold of our Medicare costs, that's going to be more, that's a bigger liability. And so I put it at 20 trillion. I should have probably said 30 trillion, in which case you'd be more frightened and you'd be more likely to act. But I want to stay, skeptical and not cynical. Is that fair, Clem?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've outlined a kind of a nightmare scenario where you have a selective default. That's the term used, where the U.S. might pay. Well, certainly it would pay its own citizens on
Sure.
treasuries.
I think we'd pay Japan, and I think we'd pay England, and I think we'd pay.
Yeah,
I'm
not sure. I'm not sure if the systems are available. I guess Elon Musk would know because he invaded them, right?
Well, when we went to SWIFT, we knew which assets were Russian, didn't we? When we went after the Russian assets?
Because the SWIFT system is about banks, right? About bank deposits, and it doesn't involve U.S. It's a different issue, but it has the same kind of analogy in the sense of, you're using a global financial system in order to reinforce sanctions, right? And the scenario you outline, it would be selective default on U.S. Treasuries as a form of sanction. And I think that it depends on the effectiveness of that. It's not I mean, putting aside market impacts, but the effectiveness of doing that requires having knowledge as to who actually is holding those treasuries. And I'm not sure that that information is readily available. I mean, there has to be.
Well, there was a whole group of people that were very worried that our treasury system was being overrun by the Japanese and the Chinese, right?
What? Yeah,
They were
but
going
you
to
know
own
what?
so much treasury that we were
Yeah.
going to have we were not going to be able to say no, and they were going
Well,
to take over the country.
Yeah, that's kind of nonsense now. And it was
I know,
not
but in the
then.
70s and 80s, I remember hearing it. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, the
I mean,
Japanese and Chinese are going to own everything.
I mean, they do hold a lot, but the vast majority of U.S. treasuries are owned by U.S. citizens.
Really? I thought it was close to 20 or 30% international.
Um,
No? Let me check.
Vast majority. I mean, 80% is vast majority.
Okay.
Unless you think 90%, 95% is vast majority.
Okay.
I mean, we can look it up, but I think 20% sounds about right. And I think Japan was the largest in that. I know UK had a lot. China, the Gulf states, we can't forget about them. They had a number of treasuries. China, certainly, but we don't know, among those Chinese holdings, we don't know that it's the government of China or Chinese banks or Chinese individuals. I mean, there's a lot. This would be this selective default business would be very complicated to organize and to
So
pull.
top foreign owners of U.S. national debt: Japan, 12.7, China, 8.9. So
Okay.
almost exactly 21. Cayman Islands and Luxembourg, which I think is kind of interesting.
Well, how much is in Cayman Islands and Luxembourg?
397 billion in Cayman. Luxembourg
Yeah.
is the fourth largest holder. Per capita, 128,000.
These would be people who don't want the U.S. government to know who they are, right? They're nominees, so to speak. And so we don't know who those people are, right?
Right, but that doesn't mean we can't save a few US dollars and not pay them their interest, does it?
Yeah, because I mean, Cayman Islands, it's a bunch of mailboxes, right? Bunch of PO boxes.
I like mailboxes. I have a mailbox and I like when it checks in there and it's my interest payment. I mean, what are you going to think against mailboxes? Luxembourg is 425 and the UK is 765, and they're in
Right.
third place at 8.9. They're almost tied with China.
Yeah.
So China is 768 and the UK.
And how much is US?
Well, this is the top 5 foreign owners, so I don't know what the overall percentage is, but Japan at $1 trillion. I mean, I think they're good, right? We still like Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think the big question is China, and will we ever resort to that type of treatment of another country if there's, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if something happens with Taiwan and the US is looking for ways to punish China for invading Taiwan,
That's it.
That's a pretty strong reaction, but I think that's, in people's testing of different strategies. And I don't think
I have to agree with that.
Yeah. So all I'm saying here, and I think all we're really trying to say is that the debt ceiling is an indicator of a much bigger and broader issue, which is how do we exist among other countries with the use of our assets, the use of our currency? And if we do think about it, are there extreme situations where, we might make a decision that is, I've heard there will be no default. But I also think when you start talking about it, you're immediately bringing up the possibility. I mean, I think it's out there, and I think it's being thought about and it's being talked about, and I think we should think about it as investors because it would sure make the corporate debt of J&J, which is still AAA, much more valuable, wouldn't it? If you knew if you were another country and you own J&J debt instead of owning treasuries, I think
It suddenly makes gold a lot more valuable.
it makes gold a lot more valuable. It makes a lot of things more valuable. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say for investors. Some of the thinking that you have to go through is, what is a worst case scenario? And how do I prepare and stabilize what is our need for income and our need for growth? And how do we balance both such that our portfolios will change and will evolve, but they will still be trying to satisfy those two objectives, right? I want to have reasonable growth and I want to have income that will allow me to live the kind of life I want to live. And I think once you start disrupting the SWIFT system and start disrupting the Treasury system, you're talking about two areas that for decades have been kind of stalwarts in our economy. And I think that the fact that we're even talking about it is not good. I don't think it's, a zero probability. I don't think it's 100. I don't think it's 20. But the fact that we're thinking about these things means that we have a problem and we need to address it. And I think that overall, thoughtful people would say, this is the way I would run my business if I was the CEO or I was the president. Why would we want to have this type of management with all the assets in the United States, all of the things that we have at our disposal to run our government more effectively? It feels like we're grasping at straws and we're doing things that are out of sync with what reasonable people should expect. And I don't think that's a political statement. I think that's everyone's responsibility, Republicans and Democrats. And I think the fact that we've gotten to this situation is everybody's fault. It isn't a Biden problem. There's plenty of blame to go around. What we have here is a problem with debt. And the solutions are to pay the debt and hope that we grow faster. And if we grow faster than the debt grows, then we will pay some of it off. Or we need to do something with a reallocation of some of that income to paying off debt. And my last comment will be, I believe one of the things that will come up when we talk about this tax cut extension is, should any of the income that comes from the extension not being extended, that money wasn't planned on coming in. Therefore, could that money be allocated towards the debt? And in that way, the whole country would not be happy that their tax rates went up. But I would certainly be more happy that some of my money that was going to the government was going to lower the national debt. I think that per capita, it's a very large number, and I'll probably get that to you by the end of this podcast. What do you think, Clem?
Yeah, I think I agree with you that there has to be some attempt to reduce, to start paying back or slowing some of the growth in the debt. I think slowing growth in debt is a more realistic objective. Slowing it so that the percentage of GDP, the debt as a percentage of GDP, starts to shrink. I think that's a logical objective. I think the way to get there is by a combination of less tax cut, less continuation of tax cut, and or cuts in government spending. So I think that's got to be the way to handle that.
As of early 2025, the national debt per capita, that's with 36.2 trillion in the national debt and 332 million U.S. population, is 106,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. So if you have a
of course, you don't pay debt with people, right?
I know, but I'm saying that if we had to lay everybody responsible for their own debt, then, we could all make a contribution equal to our amount of the national debt. And I'm sure the 400 or 500 people who did that would help reduce some debt. But
Yeah.
I think the imagery is still real, meaning
Yeah.
$100,000 of debt per capita. And I look at my taxes and I say, okay, how much is going to run the government? And if they took 5% of my taxes and applied it to the debt, would I think that's a good move? I agree. First, you have to control the growth. Then you have to go after actually lessening the amount of debt. And the way you do that typically is to grow your way up. I'm not sure if interest rates continue to rise, that growth out of it we're gonna have to achieve an exit rate of 7 or 8% for GDP, which is not sustainable. So when we have a growthy market, we're talking 4 to 5% GDP. Now we're talking 2 to 3%. So can we double the growth rate of the economy and come up with some solutions? I think it's going to be hard, but we got to look at it. I don't think that not looking at it is really worked for us. I don't think we've naturally had an affinity away from it. I think we've had an affinity for it because
Steve,
rates were so low.
let me just make one last comment, and I know we have to run. But the one way that we can, one tool we can use in order to help reduce the debt, that is to reduce the debt as a percentage of GDP by increasing GDP, is to encourage immigration into the United States.
Correct. I agree. There's lots of, like, I think our immigration policy, I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, we got PhDs and master's students who are being sent back to their countries because we don't want to give them any path to citizenship or an ability to work here.
But even those who are less educated, provided that they aren't actually violent criminals, right? Why not encourage them to come here and pay taxes and use their tax revenues to help pay down the debt or slow down the growth of the debt? Why not?
We could tie the two together. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to the $5 million golden visas that Trump's giving out. I mean, is the $5 million going to go to pay off the debt, or is it going to go to pay off the tariffs, or is it going to? And I mean, there are a lot of solutions here, Clem. But all I know is that we're talking about tariffs on steel and aluminum, and we're talking about wine tariffs of 100%. And I think those are the wrong conversations.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah, I think tariffs is an entirely different discussion, but I don't think the tariffs are going to be
It's a distraction.
It's a distraction, and you're not going to get the sizable, persistent level of income that you need from tariffs to help resolve this debt problem.
Right. I don't think it's the answer. I don't think it's close to the answer. I think it's more puffery.
Yeah.
And I don't think that has been, trademarked yet, but I'm going to say it here. Puffery is my description of what's going on, and it will continue to be my discussion until we really start talking about some of the more serious issues. So as investors, be careful out there, because some of the main issues still aren't being dealt with, and therefore that's why you hold a position in some fixed income securities or cash to try to make it so that if we have a worst case scenario and some of the debt weren't paid because of an invasion of Taiwan or whatever the situation, we have some cash and bonds that we can use to buy back some of those assets at a better price in the future. Not something I want to do. I don't want to see a 30% decline so I can buy more stocks. I would rather see us try to do things that create value right now and we move on from here. But I think that what you have to do as an investor is sometimes you have to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. And I think that all of us need to just be a little more careful and try to stay balanced and flexible and able to move in different directions as the tide or the government changes. Anything else to add, Clem?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I enjoy having you as listeners. We enjoy doing this to help you improve your investing IQ. And we hope to have some great guests coming up. Fraser Rice and Steve Gattuso. And we just want to continue to give you value in terms of ideas to help your investment portfolio and your investment IQ. Thank you.
The views shared on this podcast represent the personal investment views of the hosts. They are for educational purposes and not meant to be taken as investment advice. Listeners should consult their own investment, legal, and tax advisors. Past performance of any investments is not a guarantee for future return.